So, what is going on in Dulce, New Mexico? Or maybe more accurately, the question should be asked, what was going on in Dulce, New Mexico? This is a little video I thought I'd put together, but that is by no means a professional documentary or anything even approaching that. But I have some very interesting drone footage that I wanted to share, but it really required some explanation. So, to really explore this topic, we're going to have to go back to the year around 1985-86. And the man Paul Bennewitz, who was digging into the UFO riddle back then. And Paul Bennewitz was a man who ran a scientific company on the edge of the Air Force Base there in Albuquerque and was selling scientific equipment to the base. And as fate would have it, him being a UFO enthusiast and whatnot, he managed to capture 8 millimeter film of what he believed to be extraterrestrial or UFO craft taking off and landing somewhere there close to the Manzano nuclear complex, which is a hollowed out mountain. Is probably the best way to describe it there on the edge of Albuquerque. And he saw this as a major security threat. And in his digging, he discovered a lot of very interesting things because he researched this, believing that he had stumbled onto some kind of mass invasion or the precursor of some kind of invasion of the United States by some kind of alien forces. And if you are familiar with the story, you're aware that Paul not only contacted the Air Force, but also wrote letters to high-level politicians reporting this. Again, Paul believed that this was a significant and very real threat to U.S. sovereignty. Now, the Air Force, instead of telling Paul that he might want to just back off, that this was most likely classified aircraft programs or who knows what else, the Air Force took a totally different route, and that I'll get into here in a little bit. They fed Paul a massive amount of disinformation, which brings us to this video, the subject of this video here, which is how much of what Paul was fed is disinformation and how much did he stumble onto that was very real information. Now, they also fed Paul some very real nuts and bolts information about some classified programs, which is what is often referred to as a limited hangout, where an intelligence agency reveals some information to possibly discredit other information, like a man admitting to having an affair to take attention off of something else, like a bank robbery he did. Say, oh no, I couldn't have been robbing that bank. I was actually in the process of cheating on my wife at this hotel. So things like that, where one embarrassing thing is revealed that may or may not be true to cover up something even more egregious. Now, back to Dulce and its part in this story. What you're seeing now is the Archuleta Mesa. Now, this features prominently in UFO lore. Many of you have probably heard of the Archuleta Mesa, stories of UFO bases hidden inside and that sort of thing. Now, again, this is where things get very muddy with regards to Paul Bennewitz and the UFO riddle, because much of what Paul discovered centered around this area of New Mexico and the southern Colorado border. Now, again, this is where you have to really carefully unravel the disinformation from the Air Force versus what Paul genuinely discovered on his own. The interesting thing here is Paul made numerous overflights of this area in his private aircraft, where he discovered a lot of anomalous things in the area of the Archuleta Mesa, mostly north and kind of northwest of what you're seeing now. This is the area most people associate with the legend of Dulce, and if you do just a quick cursory Google search of this, you'll find all kinds of information about biolabs underground, aliens fighting special forces underground, all kinds of things that allegedly occurred in a massive underground base in Dulce, New Mexico. Now, in 1997, I made a trip there because I had read a lot of the stories, and most of them just said Archuleta Mesa, secret underground base. So my father and I think I was about 23 or 24 at the time, my father and I decided we'd take a trip up there and check it out and see if we could find any evidence of a secret base or anything to that effect. And we drove all the way around the mesa looking for something that looked like some kind of secret military installation. And we did stumble on the north side of the mesa, we stumbled onto an area that had some what appeared to be guard towers. Now, at the time when I saw these, my dad and I both saw that and thought, well, that's odd that a ranch would have guard towers, but we honestly believed we were looking at a ranch, so we continued on our way. But the interesting thing was we were actually followed by a white pickup truck with red and blue flashing lights that followed us for about a half a mile or so. It was a little one-lane road that you see there that we were on. This is about the area where we were when we were being run off. And I would assume now, knowing what I know now, I think we were being politely encouraged to leave this area because we couldn't pull over because there was no room to pull over. But finally, after about a mile or so, we looked back and they were gone. And we just assumed that maybe it was some kind of tribal police or something heading to some emergency situation, something else. So back to Paul Bennewitz, Archuleta Mesa, and the Dulce area in general. This area has always been very curious to me because if you visit this area, this is a very strange and beautiful area. Geographically, just absolutely stunning views of mesas and forests and everything. It's gorgeous. But the town of Dulce, New Mexico is a very odd place. It is a tribal town, so you cannot live there unless you are a tribal member. So important information there because right there you are marked as an outsider as soon as you travel through Dulce because you cannot live there unless you are a tribal member. And when you stop at a gas station or a restaurant, you will immediately feel like an outsider. It is a gorgeous place, but a very odd place. You drive through, very few people are out playing or doing much of anything. It's a very strange place, and I'm not indicting the people of Dulce in any way, but it's just a very strange town. And when we went up there in 1997, this was fall of 97, it was just at the very end of October, and as soon as we entered the town, we stayed at the Best Western. As soon as we entered the town, and we pulled up to the hotel, no sooner were we in the parking lot than a police car came around and shined its light in our car, checking us out. And it was you definitely get the feeling you're being watched, or at least you did back in 97. So, and real quick, just one of the few pictures I have from that trip, unfortunately, is this is back in the days of film cameras, so film was expensive, so you didn't just go shooting pictures willy-nilly, but I did get this nice shot of my dad doing his daily Bible reading somewhere north of the Archuleta Mesa. This is a little abandoned church we found on one of the little back roads where we drove all the way around and did terrible damage to my dad's little Chevy Nova suspension. Now back to Paul Bennewitz and his role in this affair. Paul spotted these towers and other items on the ground and potentially underground entrances and ventilation shafts and that sort of thing from his aircraft flyovers. Now, later authors like Greg Bishop would say that these were actually props put out there by the Air Force, but I'm very doubtful of that because, again, when you go back to the timeline, there was a lot of this that Paul discovered on his own, independent of the Air Force, before the Air Force got involved. The other interesting thing, and the other reason I'm inclined to think these watchtowers were not props, is that later on, NIDS, if you look up NIDS, all caps, was a research group funded by Robert Bigelow back in the 90s. And NIDS was encouraged to check out these guard towers. And when they looked into it, they immediately shot it down and said, oh, no, these are just deer stands. Stands out there that are designed for deer that might shoot back. But these look like significantly reinforced guard towers. And now we're going to segue from what Paul discovered into kind of my personal opinion. This is rampant speculation on my part of what I think was happening, or just one possible solution to what was happening here in that period of the 70s and 80s and maybe even the early 90s. I believe that Paul Bennewitz had stumbled onto a CIA or possibly some other agency had some kind of remote site here where aircraft were being tested, and very advanced aircraft were being tested. Aircraft with optical camouflage or silent helicopters, that sort of thing. And Gabe Valdez discovered a lot of this, which again is in his son Greg Valdez's book. So I don't want to put too much of that in there. I definitely recommend that book by Greg Valdez. It's called Dulce Base, and that has a lot of good information there. And I think you had several things going on here, and I think these were some really sensitive programs, which is why Paul was fed disinformation. Now, again, I think what was done to Paul was a travesty, because I hear you had a very patriotic American that I believe if they had been frank with him, I think he would have backed off and looked into other things, which again begs the question, what were they doing in Dulce that was so secret that it made more sense to destroy this man psychologically than to just politely tell him to go away? Now, one of the things I find interesting about this terrain is this matches almost identically an old Look magazine. I believe it's from 1954. Look magazine, and you'll find this, there's several magazines out there from this era of late 40s, early 50s that very frankly discuss the UFO issue as a technological issue, that this is new advanced technology that was going to be the new fighter jets of the future, were going to be these new saucer-shaped aircraft. And one of the things that Look magazine discusses is that these would be housed in underground airports, as they say, or silos, where they could take off vertically or horizontally through camouflaged entrances into mountainous terrain. So I find that very compelling, that you have an area in these Look magazine pictures that drawn to look almost identical to this terrain, and where you have reports of exactly that sort of thing. A lot of locals and a lot of researchers have claimed to have seen UFOs or strange aircraft coming out of camouflaged cliff faces and mountainous terrain, where they suddenly just see a strange aircraft either fly into or out of a mountain. So I'm inclined to think that there's something to that you had some kind of advanced aircraft facility hidden in this area that was doing research on cattle, possibly with biological and chemical weapons, and possibly advanced laser weapons and microwave weapons, using the local cattle as test subjects. Now, a lot of you would say, well, now why doesn't the U.S. military just go buy their own ranch and have their own cows? Well, there are international treaties in place that prohibit certain types of testing and certain types of weapon research as it pertains to chemical and biological weapons. So that would be the first hurdle. But the interesting thing about tribal land is it is considered sovereign territory. So there are certain legal loopholes that can be achieved by doing testing or research or even weapons manufacturing or production on tribal land. So right there, the fact that this is tribal land, this allows for some weird legal jockeying to keep you from congressional oversight that might normally be there. And in support of that, I'd like to show this old Military Review magazine that I found that was actually referenced in a Greg Bishop book. I can't think of the name of it right off the top of my head, but this article was really good, and this predates any of these conspiracy theories that all the way back in, I think this was printed in 1970, you have a Vietnam era article here talking about using bio-specific weapons or ethnic-specific weapons that would target certain ethnicities. And in this particular article, since at the time Vietnam, of course, was the war du jour, so this article points out the differences in enzymes in stomachs of different soldiers, that Western soldiers have an enzyme that helps them process milk or dairy products. And whereas that enzyme is less prominent in Southeast Asia. So you could target that enzyme, or you could make something that targets that or the lack thereof that would attack certain people with certain physiologies that are typical of certain ethnicities. And I find that really interesting that Military Review was discussing this openly. And as you'll see here from the wording, that's very disturbing, that they even talk about conquering other armies and using them as slaves using some of this technology. So very, very compelling reason to search this bio and ethnic weapon. And especially now with a lot of the pandemic news here. I'm recording this in summer of 2021. And of course, we have the COVID-19 and the coronavirus, all of that sort of thing, and rumors of that possibly being some kind of bioweapon or escaping from some kind of lab. So I think there is a strong reason to really dig into this. And I think if that is the case, if there was research being done along those lines, that would explain why Gabe Valdez was recorded as saying this was too sensitive to discuss, that some of the matters that he had stumbled onto were too sensitive to discuss because they concern matters of national security. So with that, I'll back up again and go back to Paul Bennewitz. I think Paul had stumbled onto this, and I think Paul had discovered that there was some major covert activity that he was assigning to aliens, and a lot of his assigning this to aliens came directly from the Air Force, who encouraged him to believe that this was an alien phenomenon, and obviously this was not the CIA, NSA, some other agency or whatever conducting covert operations on U.S. soil. So, and that brings us to the UFO/alien question. Now, I am personally an agnostic with regards to aliens. I haven't seen compelling evidence that aliens are real interterrestrial or extraterrestrial travelers, but I have an open mind to that. I have no problem believing that that is a possibility, but I think much of what we're seeing here in Dulce points to a very terrestrial concern here of a very terrestrial covert operations by either the U.S. government or some faction within the U.S. government that was being protected by the Air Force. So that's kind of my theory in a nutshell. I believe a lot of the cattle mutilation and the cattle mutilations and a lot of the aircraft that were seen in this area were actually the byproduct of covert operations happening over here in the Reading War Ranch, and possibly with a major underground component. I don't know. Again, that's one of those areas I haven't been able to prove or disprove. I think it was probably in that vicinity of the Reading War Ranch if there was a significant underground base. But I do find it very compelling that there's all of these watchtowers that are right on the perimeter of what appears to be a runway or staging area for aircraft, or more specifically, helicopters. This looks like an excellent place to take off and land using helicopters, and these little guard towers look like great places to guide in experimental or regular aircraft into this area. Now, quick closing word on the alien angle of this. Because again, if this is all covert operations, why is there the confusion about aliens? And I'd just like to throw out a what I call the magic show theory. Having been a professional magician many moons ago, I'll sum it up like this. If you have a a child that goes to a magic show, and you ask that child later, "Hey, Billy, what did you see in the magic show?" And he says, "Well, I saw a magician cut a woman in half and put her back together, and she got out of the box and walked away without a scratch on her." Now, Billy didn't lie. He's not lying to you. He's not making that story up. He really genuinely believes he saw that. Now, we know Billy attended a magic show, so we know that Billy is describing a deceptive performance. Now, what we have here is a situation where you have a magic show, so to speak, out in the wild for an audience that doesn't know it's an audience. And that's what I feel like is happening in much of the UFO phenomenon, is what again I'll refer to as the magic show theory, where you have people being presented with something that when they report what they have seen, it sounds outlandish, it sounds far-fetched, but they are accurately reporting what they have seen. Now, they don't realize they have been intentionally deceived because they didn't realize they were watching a show. So what that results in is two things. One is you have people who will immediately discredit themselves by repeating far-fetched information, but more importantly, you will have people repeat information that you want them to repeat. You will have them repeat information that is in a context and follows a narrative that you have chosen for them. And that, I think, is really crucial, again, to understanding the overall problem of the UFO question. Is I think you have to really strip away what intelligence agencies want you to believe in order to really understand that. And until we strip that away, the UFO riddle will remain unsolved. But we have to first put down our biases and put down our desire to believe, and remember that we may in fact be watching a magic show, and we have to first figure out who the players are in that magic show before we can figure out what is real and what is fake phenomenon. So that's my take on the Paul Bennewitz affair and the Dulce riddle of the secret base. And again, I think there is definitely something to there being a secret base, possibly a significant base in that area north of the Archuleta Mesa. And I think that's one of the red herrings there, is the base was not under the mesa. It was actually north, actually on the Colorado side of the border, possibly connected to the Redding War Ranch. Hence all these guard towers, which were conveniently brushed away by NIDS and other researchers in the 90s who said those actually didn't matter, which, back to my original point about those guard towers being labeled as props or as deer stands, if these were indeed Air Force props, then NIDS could have come right out and said that, but they did not, and they really tried to divert attention away from that. And if you've read Greg Valdez's book, you will definitely have a more accurate, sober opinion of NIDS and what exactly their research was for in the 90s. So there you have it. There's my thoughts on that. I would love to read some comments from you, any of you who stumble onto this video, because, again, this is by no means a professional production. So those of you who are curious about this subject, I hope you enjoyed the nice close-up views of the guard towers or air traffic control towers, whatever these things are, but I guarantee you they're way too close together to be hunting stands. They make way more sense that they were there as air traffic control stations or guard towers to guide in aircraft and to keep an eye on the locals that might get a little too curious. And closing word, too, on this area. This is a very remote area. You would not stumble onto this area unless you intended to go here. So this is the kind of area that's just remote enough. You don't even need fences or security signs or anything like that, because this is so remote that just by its location, it will eliminate a lot of people stomping around here trying to check into it. So again, I welcome your comments. I would love to hear anyone else who has opinions, theories, anything else on what may or may not have been happening in the Dulce area in the 70s, 80s, early 90s. Greg Valdez, in his book, he theorizes that whatever was happening probably was wrapped up somewhere in the late 90s and closed down, possibly because of the attention on this facility that came about through guys like Paul Bennewitz and other researchers who started looking into this. So My personal theory on the broader issues here is I think there were probably 2 or 3 other ranches along that Colorado-New Mexico border that were involved in similar research. So I think some of this might still be going on in other places, but I think it's a safe bet that this particular facility is closed down now. Otherwise, I would not be able to fly my drone with impunity in this area. So there you have it. I look forward to your comments, and thanks again for watching this very not professional documentary.